Okay, we are live for episode 219 of Trek Live. How you doing this morning, Dan?
Doing great. Excited for to talk about Trek this morning.
Yeah. This is first time we're kind of checking in on our rewatch in like an official. We've been doing this a lot on Trek Live. I feel like since we started the new ones that we're running now, they kind of dominated a lot of our episodes last fall and heading into the end of the year. We took a little hiatus for the holiday, came back, did the best of 2022, covered some new Trek stuff, and we've made a lot of progress on our running rewatches. I'm right at the end of season 2. I have Shades of Grey left to do to kind of put a button on season 2. And you're done, right? I think you're done.
I am done with season 2. Yes, I this week I took a break.
Okay.
Still working on my rankings, but I feel like I cruised through season 2. I think there gets to a point. I think we're going to talk about with these 2 episodes this morning that the Next Generation starts to hit kind of a nice little run here. So yeah, it's just that's kind of why I kind of turned and burned. I think on season 2 is I think it gets more consistent than it did kind of earlier on. So I'm excited.
Yeah, you were cruising. You kind of like lapped me a little bit. You were wrapping up, and I was like 9 or 10 episodes behind at one point. That doesn't usually happen, and I think that might say something about season 2, or it might just say something about what you had going on in your, what time your baby was waking up.
A combination of
yeah,
my little one waking up early and watching Star Trek. So yeah,
right. So yeah, we're going to cover 2 episodes today that are potentially. We have this recurring series. We haven't done it in a little bit. We'll pick episodes that don't get cited often as like all-time favorites. Don't get cited as like bottom of the barrel kinds of episodes either. Kind of in the middle of the pack. And look at them as potentially undervalued episodes. And we have 2 here that are very different. They're back to back. Usually we've done maybe 1 or 2 pairs of episodes that are usually close in proximity or back to back. I think we did Fair Trade and Alter Ego from Voyager back to back. And we did a couple episodes of season 3 of Enterprise, Impulse, and North Star, which are not back to back, but they're real close together. Again, like episodes that, like I said, you don't usually find on like top 10 lists of the show. So we're going to do Contagion and The Royale today. Again, two very, very different kinds of episodes of Star Trek. I think you're pretty high on both of them, I think. I'm a little more mixed on one of them. But I think that's going to be fun to talk about. We've talked about The Royale here maybe once or twice as part of our rewatch recaps as we hit it. It's an easy one to talk about. But I think it'll be fun to dive into it a little deeper. And Contagion, I think, is very well liked generally. But I know you were really big on it this time around, and I was too. So we're gonna get into those 2, see how we feel about them. Anybody in the chat, we're curious to hear what you guys think. Are these underrated, undervalued episodes of Star Trek? Where do they kind of sit in your estimation? We have Jeff in the chat. We have Rob in the chat. Welcome to you both.
welcome guys. Yeah. Good to see you.
I am eager to see your rankings, so I'm thinking we'll do that. Maybe that'll be our next episode. We might do like a rankings catch up kind of an episode in a couple of weeks here. Maybe look at seasons 1 and 2 of TNG as a package deal. Look at how the 2 seasons compare and how the rankings kind of illustrate that. And
I will say just a little update.
Sure.
I think it's hard to rank these, and currently it's just I have them ranked as just separate seasons. Like I don't have the whole show ranked.
Gotcha.
But I might do the whole show. It's just really hard. I think just me finally doing the rankings thing. I think it because TOS was such a small sample size. I think it was easier for me to kind of get into it. But yeah, I guess I'm looking forward to kind of going through the rankings as well.
TNG can be hard to rank because of how different the show kind of is. in those early seasons. Like comparing seasons 1, 2, and 3, especially when you're in the early days of it. Like sometimes I find myself kind of struggling with like a really really highly rated episode of season 1. Like where does that sit in comparison to like a really great episode of season 3? Like making sure that everything's kind of,
or even just like a kind of a middle of the road, like a B minus C plus. Like where does that kind of fall into? Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, because it's kind of like moving the goalposts a little bit with TNG. Like as the show gets going and gets stronger and stronger, what might feel like a B in season 1 might not necessarily feel like it's such an easy once you get deeper into the show. So the rankings can be a cool tool to kind of sort that out and kind of test your own your own impressions of these episodes. But I totally get it, and whatever you have, I think we should look at by season, by show, and I'm definitely looking forward to that. Rob, kind of as we kick off, is saying that he hasn't watched either of these episodes in a while, but the Royale is much more prominent in his memory, which might be a sign of preference for him. That's a key point I'm sure we're going to get into with the Royale, is it's so distinctive. Like I feel like if you're a Star Trek: The Next Generation fan and you're familiar with the show and you've seen the Royale, you're probably going to remember the Royale. Like it's just very unique in its setting and the kind of tone that it sets. So kind of wherever you fall on it, it's not an episode that's likely to kind of sink into the soup of all of the episodes that take place on the Enterprise and are character kind of dramas and things like that. Like you're going to remember the Royale if you've seen it. So that's a definite point in its favor, I think.
Yeah, and for me, it almost feels like it's the last TOS type of kind of episode where it's just, and maybe that's why it stands out so much, because I think almost to this point we're moving kind of away from like a TOS light, which season 1 feels a lot like it, but this just feels like it could be right at home at a TOS season for sure. Which it has this really big sci-fi concept, but it has that campiness feel that the TOS charm has as well.
Yeah, TOS, I mean, it's very common it really is like the formula of the original series kind of is structuring the Royale. Three people beam down to a planet, wander into like a structure of some sort, and are like whisked away into some bizarre environment that they have to figure out a way out of. I mean, that's tried and true kind of Star Trek formula from the original show, and I think it's distinctive for all those reasons. And my brain works in funny ways, and I kind of want to start with Contagion though, because it comes first. It's first on our title. It comes first in air date order. Good. So I'm eager to hear what you think of Contagion. I think what might have prompted, from my memory, because it was a few weeks ago, are kind of deciding to do this, to come back to Undervalued Treks and to talk about Contagion specifically, because I think you sent me an IM or a text that said Contagion might be the MVP of season 2 for me, something along those lines. I might be wrong. Maybe I'm misremembering other. Maybe you're talking about a different episode. I don't know, but my memory of it is you might have said something like that.
It could be. I think it was specifically. I don't know.
Maybe at that point too.
And maybe it was at that point, but I think I really enjoyed it because I think that's the mark of. I think I'm at a good point with my rewatch because I don't really remember much about Contagion going into it, and that's my goal with my rewatch is to keep it as fresh as possible, but also keep watching Trek. And I really don't remember much about it going into it. But for me, it really has everything that I really like. It has this really large sci-fi concept. It has a mysterious, a mystery about the episode that they're trying to solve. It feels big. It feels really like there's really big stakes. The Romulans, as their adversarial role in this episode, are really strong. They really feel dangerous and scary. So yeah, I mean, it just has everything. I feel like it was the term was, I think Riker was the MVP of this.
Oh, maybe.
I feel like
yeah.
in season 2, I feel like Riker just is money all the time, even in in every episode, even like the Royale, he's really good in.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's this up there for one of my favorite episodes of the season.
I agree with that. I think Frakes is really, really good in season 2 specifically. I don't know what it is about, maybe the way that the episodes are built early on. The show kind of really becomes sort of the hallmark of. It evolves into something that becomes kind of the hallmark of how Star Trek stories are told later on, around season 3, where you get these, like, okay, this is a Riker episode, this is a Data episode, this is a Geordi episode, with the other characters maybe carrying a subplot or kind of coming and going, but each character kind of having maybe 2, 3, 4 episodes a season, depending on how heavy they are in the show. But in the early seasons, it's maybe less that, and people like Picard, Riker, Data are more heavily featured, I think, more consistently. And Riker, specifically Data and Picard, are obviously very heavy throughout the show. I mean, they're major emphases of the Next Generation all the way through the end. But Riker, maybe as they fall into that pattern where everybody gets a couple episodes a year, Riker's one of those characters that gets a few episodes a year and is more supporting in other episodes. And in season 2, I think he's right front and center often. And even when he's not the forefront of the story, like in Contagion, he's in command of the ship when Picard beams down to the planet. He's kind of tangoing with the Romulan commander. He's trying to manage the crisis on the ship as everything's kind of falling apart around him. And he's fantastic. He's so charmingly in command. Like, he's so different than Picard too. He's such a credible commander, but in such a different way than Captain Picard is. Like, his style of leadership and being in command and how he interacts with his bridge crew is so different than Picard. And I think that contrast works really well throughout the show. But in season 2, I feel like it happens a lot. Contagion opens really strong as well. We're dealing with a mystery. We come into contact with another Galaxy-class ship that explodes in front of them unexpectedly. That feels like a really big moment. I think the episode sucks a lot of the juice out of that. There's a good scene in the ready room between Wesley and Picard talking about, like, how do you keep going? Like, how do you, like, put that aside and not get fixated on what just happened in front of us? And I feel like that's a good use of Wesley. If the idea is to have a younger person kind of in the mix and watching somebody grow into this role, and it isn't a seasoned Starfleet officer yet, I think scenes like that are important. I think that's a better use for Wesley than having Wesley solve problems and be 2 steps ahead of the rest of the officers for one reason or another. There's a lot going on in Contagion. I think they use the cast really well.
But to me, that's also another mark of serialization in the show, that even through this whole season, like, Wesley's trying to work through, like, his command stuff. His trying to get into Starfleet Academy. So even in this kind of really great one-off episode, there is still, like, elements of serialization even this early.
Totally. I think his relationship with Picard is charted really well through season 2. In episodes like this, you get scenes like that. He's got some good scenes with Picard and the child right out of the gate, deciding to go or stay with Beverly off the ship. Samaritan Snare being stuck in the shuttle with Picard, going on this, away mission.
Great moments.
So that's another key point. Wesley's not heavily featured in either one of these episodes, but just as a bigger, broader point in season 2. I think Wesley in season 2 is much, much better written and better situated within the cast than he was in season 1. I think they found some answers for how to use that character in season 2 and are pretty good at it. I think he's an asset to the show, actually, in season 2. I don't see Wesley and roll my eyes ever in season 2. Like, I think he's pretty well integrated by that point.
Yep, agreed.
Contagion also features, the kind of classic, the ship kind of has a virus, the computers, a lot of the story is driven by this. They get probed by the Iconian stuff, and it injects a kind of computer
Lightning
virus
bolt.
into the ship. A
Yeah.
lightning bolt hits
Yeah.
the ship, and now we have to solve that problem. And I know one point you made is the sort of retro solution to that is kind of memorable. So, like, what struck you about that?
I just love that the solution to this problem is just like a 24th century turn it off and turn it back on.
Yeah.
Like if anyone knows tech support has
Mm-hmm.
dealt with anything like that, one of the first things that people try is, have you tried turning
Did
it
you
off,
reboot
turning
it?
it back on? And I just
Mm-hmm.
I love that we get this great technobabble explanation from Jordy that, like, we're gonna power down the system, clear everything, and go back to a previous version, which is essentially like turning it off and turning it back on. Um, I find it really funny, but also it feels fitting. And
Yeah.
um,
They kind of stumble into it by accident too. It is like a
Yeah.
retro old school solution, but Data kind of gets shut down. He gets infected by it, and the way they kind of accidentally sort of fix Data is kind of letting him shut down and then trying to get him back on. And when he turns back on, it kind of purges the virus. So I like that. You know, it's kind of accidentally stumbled upon. I really like, it's kind of a side note to that, before that happens, when they're on the planet and in the Iconian kind of lab, something really unique, I don't know if you noticed this in those scenes. The Next Generation is very much all the way through it, from beginning to end, really. Put the camera on the tripod and point it and shoot it. Like, there's very little handheld camera. There's very little, like, shaky stuff. Enterprise does it a little bit later, introduces it in Season 3, Season 4 especially, but most of the Berman-era Trek is not very stylistically shot that way. But those scenes on the planet with Picard, Data, and Worf kind of wandering around that set and trying to figure out how the consoles work and why the portals are this or that. There's a lot of handheld camera in there. That's just kind of a unique anomaly that for whatever reason they decided to give a shot, and it stands out to me when I watch it. I'm like, oh, that's really cool, because they just typically don't do that for really any reason. Very rare. Occasionally here and there, in very minor moments, but exceedingly infrequent, I would say.
Yeah, and I think anytime it happens, it's super memorable.
Yes, I think so.
They do it in Voyager too, like a really pan, like across the bridge, like following Harry across the bridge.
Yes,
like when you see that shot, like you just remember it. So
yeah, because they don't ever do it. I mean, it's they are so traditional in their approach from the cinematography standpoint, that when they do break out and do a little something different, it really does like jar you a little bit in that era of Trek. Obviously, the new stuff does it all the time. Like, the new stuff's visual like structure is kind of, that's part of the show, I think, in modern TV. But the old school stuff, not much. So yeah, there's another thing I know I said to you when I was watching Contagion, is while they're on the bridge trying to deal with the kind of ship falling apart around them, another thing that strikes me about Frakes in Season 2 is the chemistry between Frakes and Marina Sirtis, even when it's not on the page. Like, when they're not, there's nothing in the writing, there's nothing in the dialogue that like implies history and attraction and something beneath the surface and that deeper connection, when it could just be two people just in a command situation sitting next to each other having a conversation about the crisis. Those two actors, Frakes and Sirtis, just always like inject that little extra something in their looks and the way that they talk to each other. And there's a really good scene on the bridge with Riker and Troy sitting next to each other and talking about like how to get the crew to battle the tension, and Riker gives her the task of like kind of getting ready to evacuate the ship if necessary. And the way that dialogue is executed is just loaded with that history and the subtext of what we know is there, but the show doesn't always keep front and center consciously. So, you know, I just feel like so much of what that becomes, and the fact that stays there throughout the show and gets paid off later, is a credit to the two actors for kind of forcing the show's hand to kind of keep it in the mix. So,
Yeah, it's just fantastic by both those actors. I love when it's just, and I love the freedom to like, you know, the creatives just kind of let it go and kind
Yeah.
of let it, and it's so subtle that it just adds such a great rewatchability to even just middle of the road episodes where you can see that tiny little glimpse of just interjection that's just so good.
Yeah, I think it's totally subtle enough that if you're just stumbling in and you're watching Contagion in syndication as like a very casual person that might watch The Next Generation on in a gym or in passing, like it's not going to do like there's nothing in there that's like, whoa, those two characters are, like it's not that obvious. But if you have it in your head, if you know the history and if you know the where it's going to go, if you're invested in the show, I think it's kind of impossible to miss, and that's credit to them to make it work both ways. And I think Frakes is like super underrated. I forget where we talked about it. It might have been last week or the week before. At some point along these last few episodes, Frakes gets really, because of how prolific he becomes as a director and as a behind the scenes person in the modern stuff, in having directed two of the movies, having ties to all these other shows. Like it's easy to kind of think about him as that. Like he's an actor in the show, but he's this great director. He directed First Contact and some really great episodes of The Next Generation and Discovery and Picard and all this stuff. But he is freaking great as Commander Riker, like all the way through. I think he's an underrated element of that cast that always delivers the goods. And one of the things that's been said about Picard season 3 is that Jonathan Frakes as Riker is the second most prominent character in the season after Picard, of course. And I'm excited about that. I'm excited to see Riker, like Jonathan Frakes, play Riker, like really play Riker for a lot of 10 episodes. That's one of the things, like watching the show now, like as we're getting ready for that and kind of informing my, like what my expectations are and what I hope to see. And this kind of last hurrah for those characters is like wanting to see more of Frakes as Riker because he's so good, I think.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. Whenever the episode where he does the Klingon exchange.
Oh, he's so good.
He's just like so good. Like I know, I think you're right. You make a great point. It's like, yeah, he's touted as really talented actor, but I think he's got some really great talents, or talented as a director. But I feel like he's got some really great talents as an actor as well. Not just prominent in season 2.
I think the people always talk about the yin and yang of Kirk and Spock, and I think Picard and Riker is a really good combination. The more I watch that show, like just like I said, when Riker's in command, he's so different than Picard, and they see things the same but differently. Like I think they're on the same track and they get to the same place, but they're such a testament to like don't box people in and don't make people lead the same way. Like people have to lead the way that they are and be their true self. And Picard and Riker are different people with different histories and different strengths. And they're both awesome in leadership roles because of their own skills and personality traits and embracing those traits and not trying to be something they're not. And I think that's a really cool thing to see over the course of the 7 seasons of that show.
Yeah, and to me, I don't know, to bring this back to Contagion here, really quick. Riker just is interesting because he's been like from the very beginning, he's been really like concerned about the captain's safety, and I think people tout like I don't see Riker letting Picard go down, but I think you get to see some of like Picard's love for the mystery that they're trying to solve with the mystery down on the planet and with that species. I believe that Picard would want to go down.
100%.
Especially with like I feel like it felt like almost he had like he's obviously interested, but it's also like it's because of the destruction of the ship, of the other Galaxy class ship, that he just wants to see it through.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think it's also laying the groundwork because we don't get a ton of it in season 1. I think by season 2 we're starting to lean into things like,
the archaeology.
Yeah. Historian,
sure.
Like he loves this stuff. This is what gets him juiced up. Like he wants to know these things and is interested in these things. And those are the kinds of mysteries and the kinds of situations that are going to make him want to beam down to the planet when it's tied to those kinds of things. That's what's going to get him. And I think Riker knows that and kind of knows when to let him go.
It's almost like, is he safer down on the planet or on the ship?
Yeah, true.
And that's the dilemma that I think Riker. I mean, obviously, I think Riker can definitely see that he's not going to let this go. But
yeah,
it's also like, is he safer down on the planet than in this malfunctioning ship?
For sure. Like knowing their skill sets, like who's got a better chance of going down there and solving how this thing works? Like Picard or Riker? It's probably Picard. Yeah. And if they don't solve it, they're all going to die on the ship anyway. So it probably makes sense for Picard to go. So that all adds up as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, the Romulans are really good in it too. Like you mentioned, this is we're starting to get a little more taste of that. The Romulans sort of become a recurring, obviously, adversary for the show. They pop in every so often, every season. I feel like there's at least a couple of episodes that are driven by the Romulans as this looming threat that we don't quite know what to do with. I think it's Carolyn Seymour plays the Romulan commander, who I think fits right in with Mark Leonard in Balance of Terror and Joanne Linville in the Enterprise incident as these like imposing, incredibly in command, seasoned, experienced officers on the other side of the view screen that are threatening in all the right ways. I think she's really good in it. I like that we get on the Romulan ship. Like we actually get to see like what the bridge of the Romulan warbird looks like. It's an ambitious swing. There's a lot going on in this. We blow up a Galaxy class ship. We're down on there's a lot of other sets. We have a Romulan ship. We're on that ship, and they build a set for that. We have the set down on the planet in that lab that I think is another memorable location. It's kind of cramped and circular, and with the portal. Like there's just a lot of juice in this episode. I think from a creative standpoint too, that is pretty memorable. So. Rob, since you said you don't remember Contagion very much, I would say hopefully maybe this weekend or before the weekend's over, pop it on. Yeah. See what you think. Anything else on Contagion before we pivot over to the Royale? You kind of want to touch on?
I don't think so. I'm really mad at myself that I didn't really remember it going in. So.
No, don't be mad at yourself. That's what makes it great. Roundabout, without kind of, I know you're still working on it, but where in like general proximity do you think it's going to sit like in season 2? Is it like a top 3, top 5, upper half?
It's definitely top 5.
Top 5 in the season.
Yeah, top 5 in the season. Yeah, and I think you could even say like top 5 to this point, probably pretty close. If we're talking just like season 1 and season 2, I think it's one of the show's best so far for me, at least.
Great, very cool. All right, so let's get into the Royale a little bit. I know you've kind of always been a fan of this. I feel like whenever we get to the Royale, either you or me on our own rewatches, or if we get into just kind of touching on season 2 of TNG, I feel like this one always comes up, and it is. I think it's an interesting one to talk about because it's one of the episodes out there that is polarizing. When I would run episode polls and ask people to weigh in with like letter grades or to kind of put their stamp on where exactly they feel about it, it's always pretty split. Like this is not a consensus building episode. This is, people love it, people hate it, people are indifferent. I think you get representation across the board when you talk about this in groups of people. And I think a lot of that is because of how distinctive and unusual it is and how singular it is. And like we mentioned right off the top, I think it's telling that, people come into a chat like this, like Rob did, and said, as soon as you see the Royale, you know what the Royale is, whether or not you like it or hate it or somewhere in between. If you saw it, you're going to remember it. So I think we should kick it off with because I'm a little more mixed on it. I don't hate it. It's not at the bottom of my list, and I've actually grown to like it more as I've gotten older. But talk a little bit about what kind of you appreciate about it and where you see it as a whole.
Well, what I appreciate about it is kind of what I talked about, at the top of the show.
TOS.
I really, it feels like a TOS. I think that Trek Ranks, has episodes that feel like TOS.
Mm-hmm.
This one is that probably at the top of my list.
Yeah.
But again, I really do like this sci-fi concept, that this world, this planet, like takes just this facsimile or takes this world from a book and kind of puts it into like real life. And I know the mystery definitely has holes in it with the lost astronaut, but I really like the sci-fi concept of just it feels like almost like a holodeck episode, but like in real life, where it's like just if things in it aren't reality, but because it's based off this novel, that's what I really like about it. So yeah, I think that's really the big things for me. Now I know people are gonna come at me and say like, well, why don't you like a piece of the action as much as maybe the Royale? It's just it's just different. I think they're kind of on similar playing fields, but I think there's definitely some danger and some mystery to the Royale that I like a little bit more, than the piece of the action.
I think the foundational like science fiction idea of the Royale is more compelling than a piece of the action. I like a piece of the action. I like a piece of the action more as an episode of Star Trek. I find it more entertaining. I enjoy it more. But yeah, like you said, this the idea of like a super advanced non-humanoid unknowable kind of species finds this human, examines everything around them and creates an environment from a book that is with him. It just happens to be like a bad pulp book, like it's a bad like airport kind of novel that is like this, it's super junky, and it's like a B movie that gets built around it, and I think that's a cool idea. It's a big, unique, ambitious science fiction idea. But most of it's off screen, like that we don't meet these aliens. We don't see what happened to the astronaut. We're just seeing the fallout of it. That this guy had to live that way until he died, and that this is obviously the impression that these beings had of humanity taken from this book, kind of like the aliens in a piece of the action assumed that the book found on the crashed Starfleet ship from 100 years ago about mob life in Chicago in the 1920s was what that's what it's supposed to be. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they're very different. I mean, they're similar for all the obvious reasons. The sort of setting is similar, casino kind of vibe, but gangsters and mobsters and that whole thing. But the Royale is a much more threatening story. I think the stakes are a little higher. There's not much. There's some comedy going on in the Royale, but it's darker for sure than a piece of the action. Piece of the action kind of embraces like this is a comedy kind of from the get go, and leans into that as its kind of genre of choice.
But
yeah.
But again, like look at this kind of attempt at communication style. Like we've seen it all through Star Trek. Like even like the wormhole aliens, they like will take the look and feel of all our main cast members. And I think that that's a little bit different because it's a character specifically, but it's trying to bring to be able to communicate with this new form of life that they've just encountered, a human astronaut. They kind of have to find something
middle ground somehow.
Figure out somehow
what they can.
Which I think to me is just a really a Star Trek trope that I love. So.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's. Yeah, I agree. I love the concept of the Royale. I think the science fiction idea that it's built off of is interesting and kind of well situated to be a good Star Trek episode. My problem with the Royale has always been like it's almost too effective at what it sets out to do. It recreates and and wants to put us in the midst of like a bad kind of B movie, B novel, with cringy kinds of characters and tropey and cliche dialogue. Like that is the idea. That's literally what is. The characters are aware of it. They know it. They're walking around going, "Man, this sucks," and they know why it sucks, and it makes sense to us that it sucks, but it sucks. Like it's you have to, I guess, find. I think your mileage will vary based on how down you can be with that and how you can kind of just roll with those punches. And I've always kind of find myself wanting to like it more than I do, because I just get hung up on. I hate all these people. Just like get me out of here. But that's what it's supposed to do. The characters need to get out.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
So I find myself like right in the middle of the pack with it. Like it's effective at what it does. It's not really for me. I can't sit here and say that it's like a go-to for me. I don't totally dig it, but I appreciate that it successfully achieves, I think, what it sets out to achieve. And I have to hand it props for like an ambitious concept, and that's a gutsy move. Like to embrace we're gonna live in this kind of a setting and make it as kind of bad as we can make it as far as that goes, and build the story around that. And I think that's cool. So I think I gave it a C, which I used to go lower than that. I think in the pre-Trek Live days before I had people to talk to and this kind of outlet to like feel out my own thoughts, flesh out how I feel. I probably would have gone as low as like a D+ kind of area for the Royale, like talking 5-6 years ago. But I feel like every time I've watched it, I end up in a similar conversation like this with you specifically, and I pull myself up on it because I feel like it's. I see it. I think I see what the successes are and kind of appreciate those. So. And it is like the production design's really cool. I mean, that feels like a pretty big. I think they successfully achieve making that place feel real, as real as it can be. Like it feels like a big casino. Like there's different areas, and it feels it's like well populated with people and activity and stuff going on that doesn't quite feel right. Like it always feels a little off and a little alien and weird and dark and mysterious, but it's lively too. Like it feels. Like a place that somebody could be forced to live for a lifetime. So
which is a part of the success, I think, of the show or of this episode. It's like that's what its goal is to do. But I guess that's also why I have no interest in not as much interest as most people to go to STLV is because I think there are some definitely some places in Las Vegas that I feel like would feel like the Royale. So
yes.
It's stuck.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Jeff is asking, has Snaptrek ever done the Royale and Spectre of the Gun? Spectre of the Gun's a great comparison. It's basically the same thing. Yeah. It's just it's the Old West.
It is.
It's aliens that pull something out of somebody's head or something and use that to kind of build the environment and put the characters into. And that's a really good point. I don't think they have. So you should send a message Jen Tiff's way, Jeff.
Because that would be a really good comparison.
Yeah, for sure.
The only thing I'd worry about is if they had done a Spectre of the Gun. Yeah, I'd have to look at it. But yeah, that's a great comparison.
Yeah, have they compared other Westerns or something?
Yeah. Other Westerns, yeah.
But I think from a conceptual, like plot, science fiction idea standpoint, the closest parallel to the Royale might be Spectre of the Gun. The setting, it's totally a piece of the action, I think. Like the kind of vibe, it's the kinds of characters that are populating the world. I think it's a piece of the action-ish. But Spectre of the Gun, as far as like the how do we get in this kind of situation, is a really good comparison.
Yeah, almost like the resolution a little bit better in Spectre of the Gun.
Mm-hmm.
The ending of the Royale feels a little bit just kind of run of the mill, but I just love it for its feel of TOS, and then it's like you said the B movie aspect of it is it feels successful, but just a little bit off. Like the Matrix, there is a little bit of a glitch in the Matrix here. That there is something that's not quite right.
Yeah, and you're always just knowing you like a little cheese, a little
Yes.
a little retro, a little cornball,
Yeah.
kind of in your Star Trek at
Yes.
times. Like that is not a turn off to you.
Yes.
That is something that you will embrace. I don't think it's like a prerequisite. Like all your favorite episodes aren't necessarily all that, but it's a pretty good shortcut to having you be thumbs up on it a lot of the time, and maybe more thumbs up than other people are. And when episodes kind of embrace that and hit those things, so. Yeah, I love that about Dan too, Jeff. I think that's cool, and I've grown to appreciate it more myself just after, spending a lot of time with Dan. So,
but that's the goal of the Undervalued Trek series is to find episodes that aren't quite they're in that C+ range that I think it deserves some love and deserve to be talked about. So I feel like this morning I feel like it's a little bit different with Contagion. I think that's definitely a lot higher than the Royale, but I think for me Contagion fell under the Undervalued is just because I forgot about it, and when I hit it really made me realize how great it is.
I also think, in my experience, just talking to people and seeing how seasons 1 and 2 of The Next Generation get talked about, I feel like unless you're The Measure of Man or Q Who, like the good episodes from seasons 1 and 2 kind of get put into like they're good, but they're season 1 and 2 kind of box. Like they kind of get pushed down the list a little bit.
Yeah.
I think episodes like Conspiracy, episodes like A Matter of Honor, which we talked about, Peak Performance, which I just watched last night, that is fantastic Star Trek.
Yeah.
Like the Contagion's one of them for sure. Matter of Honor. I think 11001001, The Arsenal of Freedom, episodes that I think are really well respected and well liked from that era of The Next Generation. That are often cited as the best of those two seasons, just don't get quite the same degree of elevated esteem that The Measure of a Man and Q Who do. And I think Q Who is obvious because of it's Q, it's the Borg, like it introduces so many like linchpin, huge pieces of Star Trek lore. It sets a lot into motion that makes it impossible to ignore, and it is great. I think it is like great Star Trek, and The Measure of a Man is like I think correctly routinely picked as like an all timer. So I think Contagion just falls into like a pack of episodes that is liked, but might kind of artificially get pushed down on lists because of they're wearing the onesie spandex uniform still.
Yeah, and they're still in. Yeah, it depends on what season they're in. Yeah, that's a great point. It's a really great point. How many great episodes of Star Trek are brought down because they're in not great seasons?
Right. I think a lot. I think if it's not in like the peak era, it episodes can kind of get a little short shrift. And peak performance, Rob's talking about how much he likes it too. I mean, that's one that has grown on me. I've always been a fan of peak performance. I've talked about it before here. I feel like maybe the last time I hit it on my rewatch, like an episode like that. And even Contagion, I would say maybe kind of doubling back to Contagion. I think peak performance and Contagion both sort of are easy to maybe punish a little bit for not having like a profound like morality play to them, or like there's nothing like Hallmark Star Trek kind of big, important, huge social commentary aspect.
Thank you, man. Star Trek.
Yeah. Like maybe they don't have that to them, but I think both of those episodes do a lot of world building for the show and are really good to the characters and help build the Next Generation to what it is, and the episodes like that are what make the other episodes, like we were just talking about, the more socially commentary, heavier swing kinds of episodes hit harder. I think these are the episodes that kind of do the dirty work of building the characters up and making us care about them. And they're more workmanlike, but they're they're great. I think, yeah.
I hope that we can just understand that not every episode of Star Trek we have to get back up on our soapbox and have that morale
No,
play.
yeah.
I will say that it's definitely a pillar of Star Trek, and
Sure.
it's what makes Star Trek Star Trek. But also, it's like we don't have to have one of those episodes every week.
It doesn't need to be one note, right? It can do all these things.
Even for the development of these characters, especially when we're in kind of, well, except for Discovery, we're in like the first half of, most of these newer shows. I think there needs to be episodes like these where, yeah, they're really great, but they're so developmental for our characters and even other, species, and like the Romulans, the Borgs, the Q. Like we need things like that to kind of move these characters and people forward. So,
and there are great moments even in these episodes, like in Peak Performance. One of my favorite Captain Picard moments in the entirety of the show is him talking to Data in his quarters and saying, "It's you can make no mistakes and still lose, and that's not weakness, it's life." Like, to me, that's like real life advice and things that people need to hear at various points in their life. And like, he's so matter of fact and like punching about it, but it's so true, and people need to hear it. And it's in Peak Performance. Like it's exactly what I think people want Next Generation to be, with Picard doing the things that Captain Picard gets like put up on a pedestal for doing. And it's not the drumhead and it's not the Offspring, these big emotional kinds of or political episodes. It's a little more a little more low key than that maybe, but no less impactful moment for it. So I think this was a successful conversation. I really enjoyed covering both of these episodes and talking about TNG season 2 more broadly as a part of it as well, which I think is fitting since we're both kind of wrapping that up too. Where would you put the Royale? Kind of to ask you the same question about that I did with Contagion. Like, is it upper
letter
half?
grade or?
Yeah, whatever you want to. Yeah, letter grade-ish. Where, like, in the season 2 scale, do you kind of put it?
It might be. I don't know. It's top 15 for sure.
Top 15, so upper half.
Yeah, definitely upper half for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so I mean, I think, like you kind of mentioned a couple minutes ago, these two episodes they're very different. And even within the Undervalued umbrella, we're kind of talking about two different things. I think Contagion, it might not be a classic. I don't think either one of us is sitting here saying it's like a top 10 episode of The Next Generation. It's not like, an all-timer by any means. But there are interesting things to talk about. There are cool things that make it unique and distinctive. And because of the fact that it doesn't get put on those kinds of lists, I think it's important to find a way to throw it some love and talk about, what makes it unique and different, and give it its moment in the sun. And then Contagion, like we were talking about, is I think a really great episode of Star Trek, but is undervalued because it's not put on the pedestal with yesterday's Enterprise and Measure of a Man and Darmok and the Inner Light and all good things, but maybe it's not that high, but it's up there, and it's a really great episode of Trek.
And I think as far as ranks goes, I think again we're dancing around the best and favorite type of episodes,
right?
And I think that's the challenge about rankings, is like, I think these two episodes are such a perfect example of that. It's like, I think, yes, Contagion does check all the boxes of a really great episode of Star Trek, but I think the Royale definitely has marks of like, okay, this is kind of subjective. This could be someone's favorite episode of season 2.
Totally.
It's great,
for sure. Yeah, and I think it's also a hallmark of. I think it's a really key, strong example of the Swiss Army knife of Trek. Like how different these two episodes can be back to back. Like one week you get Contagion, the next week you get the Royale. They're very, very different kinds of episodes of TV, and I think that's a calling card of particularly this era of Star Trek, being able to do that. So, and I think it's kind of new. Season 1, of TNG, I don't know that you get that as much. Somewhat. You get the Big Goodbye by the nature of being in the holodeck is kind of a
Little bit.
different, but I don't think it embraces the diversity of tone and genre and stuff until season 2 and then onward from there. I think this is an early example of, we can do 2 totally different kinds of things back to back. So. Cyber Honey joining us right here at the end. Really good to see you, as always.
Welcome.
Welcome. And Rob is saying he'd probably give the Royale a C. He needs to rewatch Contagion before he ranks it. So we're on the same page with the Royale. I would also give it a C. But it's one of my favorite episodes to talk about. I'll say that. When I've polled episodes in the past, I always love finding the ones that are so polarizing and have such a differentiation of opinions out there. They're the cool ones to talk about for sure, because there's so much unique stuff out there. So I think that'll do it. I think we haven't totally locked this down. We didn't really talk about it until we started this episode. But I think the next time we're here in a couple weeks, I think it would probably make sense to maybe do a season 1, season 2 TNG wrap up, look at those 2 seasons together, do our ranks in whatever way we do them, look at that kind of stuff. I could show my spreadsheet off again, go over some of that stuff, compare our rankings, and kind of take stock of where TNG kind of sits after a little less than a quarter of it in the first 2 seasons.
So that looks like the February 5th, I think, is the date would be. But like Bill said, the discussion doesn't have to stop here. You don't have to wait 2 weeks to hear from us, Twitter and Discord. I think probably the best time to get into Discord is right now, because there's going to be lots of talk about new Trek right around the corner. There are spoiler-free areas if you haven't watched it yet or whatever. So don't feel like if you go into the Discord you're going to get the plot of Picard. Well, I mean, if you come to a Trek After Dark, maybe you'll get the plot of Picard spoiled. But there's all great resources there. So definitely check that out.
Yeah, so if you're a Discord user, or you're interested in becoming one, and you would like to find a server to talk Star Trek with folks, the Trek Live Discord server is a good one. It's modest. It's not overly crowded. It's not going to blow up your phone with notifications over and over again all day long that are impossible to keep up with. It's a nice group of people who are positive and welcoming and talk about all kinds of Star Trek. And I will be happy to get you on board. You can DM me on Twitter at TrekFan4387, and I can get you an invitation and talk to you about Discord in general, too. If you have questions or haven't used it before, I can kind of give you the lowdown as best I can. But it's a good place to connect with us on a more personal level. Dan mentioned Trek After Dark. That's a more casual hangout where we can all, if you choose to go on camera, you can see. I mean, you can come in and see everybody who's on camera. You can show yourself off too, and get a little more of a personal conversation going with the folks on the server. Many of whom are on Twitter, Trek Twitter, and we kind of just talk about life, talk about Star Trek, and it's a good time. We try to do it every quarter. And it's a really nice place to hang out and get to know some other fans. So if you're interested in that, DM me on Twitter. I'll get you on board. And otherwise, like Dan said, we're on Twitter talking about Trek all the time. So follow us there, and don't be afraid to chime in and share your thoughts as we go.
Yep. I want to thank everybody for watching. It's been really fun chatting all of you about Season 1, Season 2, all of Trek. We will see you guys in 2 weeks. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.